which is a fun and pretty cool. They're not no one's overly strong. I'd say like most of them are 16 to 1800 strength, but it's way stronger than me still. So it's very fun and helpful.
Good. Most of my students say no. I have there's no over the board stuff around me, or COVID has stopped everything, and I'm only doing online. But I highly recommend if you can get to over the board, especially if it's
Yeah.
USCF rated or whatever rating system you have going on in Canada, right?
Yeah, yeah, CFC, but I think they translate pretty closely.
Mm-hmm. Because then you can get like practical results if you're taking lessons or something and see, is this actually doing something for me, or is it not?
Yeah.
You can test that with Blitz and Bullet as well, but there's something that's more official about sitting over the board with somebody.
Yes, I find that just for whatever reason, mentally, you just take those games so much more
Yeah.
seriously as well. Yeah.
And then when you can see like the impact, if you get a winning position, then usually the person, like, there's emotional tells, they'll start shifting around, or they'll start sighing and moaning, and that's pretty funny.
Yeah.
Or you'll be doing that if you're losing, of course, unless you hide your emotions well, like a poker player. Okay, so do you have a preference for chess.com or Lichess?
Doesn't matter.
Did you send me your usernames?
Yeah, LJ Hartman.
LJ Hartman for both?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just do Lichess then, since I want to help you look at building repertoires after the game anyway.
Awesome.
And if we have some time at the end of it, then we can look at that position I posted in the group.
Yeah,
For a couple
I'm
minutes.
interested. I was so tempted to plug it in, but I haven't yet.
Yes, thank you for not plugging in. Engines are good, but they're also bad at the same time. There's a specific way to use them. I even bought a book from somebody at a GM's recommendation, where he said if you want to understand how engines think and how to translate their interpretation of the game to your understanding, by this book. I haven't looked into it too much yet, but
Yeah.
it looks pretty interesting.
I have a bad habit of that. Or looking at a game after, I'm like, oh, I lost a +4 position, but yet there's just too much going on to figure out how.
Yeah.
Sometimes, yeah.
Yep. The engine evaluation sometimes means nothing, and sometimes it can say you're like a +3, +4, and it's so difficult for you to understand the position that you don't even know you have an advantage, and then you end up losing because of that.
Yeah.
So like understanding what I call like the actual evaluation of the position is very important, and computers can help with understanding the actual evaluation. Title players, GMs, etc. will help with that as well, but there is just like in regular life, you have people talking about truth and whatnot, and you can understand the actual so-called truth is something different than what everyone understands it to be, but there is something that you can aim towards, right? You can keep getting more and more accurate towards the ideal, I guess you could say. Okay. LJ Hartman. Oh, you do have studies. Nice. You're the first person I've seen that actually has studies on there.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I was just messing around with them.
That's good.
One of my coaches does a lot of studies, so I have a lot of shared studies from him, and then some of my tournament games I upload.
Okay, perfect. So I started off doing 15 plus 10 games, but everyone was always like down to seconds for the last few moves, so I'm upping it to 20 plus 10. That should still be enough time to do that.
I play mostly 15-10, so I think
Okay. Are you an E4, D4, or some other type of opening in general player?
D4 is mostly what I've looked at.
Okay.
Yeah, I've just recently experimenting with E4. I've been told I need to play E4 at some point in my life. So,
E4 is fun. E4 is like the attacking opening. D4
I've been told practically to have chances against higher rated players learn E4.
Yep,
but
it's good.
I only know d4, so that's what I play.
Perfect. So yeah, just explain as we go whether you have opening knowledge in the position or not, and just in general, what are your thoughts if there are
Cool.
crazy things going on.
Yeah. So this is all.
And I have like quite a bit of experience in d4 as well.
Yeah.
I have played e4, but it's not like it's not my go-to opening by any stretch. So this would be the Queen's Gambit declined exchange variation, right?
This is the exchange slot, yeah.
Exchange Slav. So we're gonna have a symmetrical game, because pawns are the same, and it's going to look. It's going to be interesting to see how somebody makes something out of this game for sure. Okay. Your dark squared bishop is your most active piece, so I'm just going to try and trade that off.
And I think when I get this, I typically am like g3, bishop g3.
Okay. And we get this bishop to g3 in London types of positions all the time, right?
Yep.
And you probably know if black takes, then it's usually pretty decent for white because he has the open or the semi-open H file to work with. I've heard a saying that says to take is a mistake, and I kind of agree with that on some levels, not at every single position, of course, but and the reason to take is a mistake in general, from my understanding, is you're getting rid of a piece of yours that is sort of advanced, and whenever they take back with something else, they're advancing that piece. So the interaction has resulted in a net, like you aren't as advanced, or you lost a piece off the board and you helped them advance.
And now here I'm thinking where I want to place slight square bishop.
Mm-hmm.
Liking e2 and d3 are my options.
Okay.
And I'm liking d3 so that way I have a little more control over e4, and I also have e2 for my knight.
Yep. D3 is probably a more common square. Also, that's the most active long diagonal you can put it on. As far as knights are concerned, most opening theory revolves around them being on c3, f3, c6, and f6. So if you end up putting a knight on, say, like from b to d7 or to d2 in white's case, then you kind of want to know a little bit of the theory surrounding that particular type of move.
Mm-hmm.
You usually don't need to learn a ton of theory, though. Okay.
I'm gonna see. The idea of that move is maybe go after my nice for bishop with 94.
Yep, possibly.
94. Where do I place the bishop? Do I go like 94? I play like bishop e1. Maybe, or do I just stop e4 with a3? This is that's my current thoughts. Or I can just go for a3, which just completely stops a4. Does it? Well, it's 2 pawns. Yeah, that's fine.
You're trying to see if I would sack if you played a3?
Yeah, but like there's no reason.
Yeah. It's good to consider, though. I like your thought process. It's good to consider all possible sacks.
So yeah, a3, or continue with my plan of 92. The reason I like 92 over f3 is I know of the like e4 pawn break. I'm not sure if I want to do that here.
Mm-hmm.
And if I go for that, I have to exchange bishops and castle before the e4 pawn break, I think.
I see.
If you're following, I don't know.
Yeah. You want to exchange bishops first.
Yeah, exchange.
I don't know if you would need to exchange bishops before trying e4, but you would definitely probably want to develop your other knight and maybe probably castle beforehand.
Yeah, if I play 92, I have a defender on that bishop without having to play h takes g3 after I castle.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then I can get like f3, e4 in. But if I play a3, we'll go back to this idea because it's my first thought. Do you do anything that scares me or that like forces me to change my plans, right? And I don't really think so. Maybe the rook e8, rook e8, e5. No, that doesn't. I don't think that does anything.
There is something to consider for trying to get the e4 break in that I haven't heard you mention yet, and that is that whenever you push e4, you're going to immediately isolate your pawn on d4.
Mm-hmm.
And if I just take, then I am now looking at your pawn. I have that semi-open file, so I might be able to attack d4. So something to consider if you want to play e4 at some point is my pawn on d4 going to be weak or possibly taken, and if that is the case, do I have enough counterplay if that pawn does get taken?
See, okay, yeah, that is not something I thought of.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna play a3 and think about the idea later.
Yep, that's always an option. I don't know if you know Magnus. There's like a thing about Magnus that he doesn't play pawn moves that often. He doesn't change the pawn structure very often, and when he does, there's a very, very concrete reason for why he changed the pawn structure. So if you're making pawn moves, it's almost like pawn moves carry greater gravity than piece moves in some way. Pawn moves are kind of like mainly because pawns can't go backwards, right? So if you push something too far and you end up making a weakness in your pawn structure, you can't like all of a sudden move your pawn back. Okay.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
So I'm just going to play b6 with the idea of playing bishop b7.
Okay.
And this looks possibly kind of ugly because I'm looking at my own pawn, but I know these positions relatively well, and I know if I can get my knight to e4 and you end up exchanging, then I have an outpost for my bishop on d5, and there's possible play around getting like a knight to c4. And also, if you ever play d4 and my bishop's on b7, then that long diagonal will be opening up for me.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay.
You said two thoughts?
Yeah, two thoughts. One is continue with this knight and castle idea, or rook ace c1, so rook c1 with
okay.
like knight b5 ideas, or bishop takes knight b5 ideas.
Okay. Interesting. You do want to put rooks on open files or semi-open files.
Yeah. I don't know if I'd take bishops first, or if I just play rook c1. Although you would get in like a6 just with stuff.
Yeah, I may play a6 at some point. I could have started with a6 and then played sort of like b5 after that with a similar idea.
Yeah.
Um, Sometimes I don't advance pawns really far because every time you get a pawn, say to like b5, then that
Mhm.
always gives you a hook if you want of like pushing a4. And usually I can just push b4 if you do that, but um, this is just like a matter of preference in this particular position.
Yeah. I see. Okay, I'm not feeling. I'm liking just both these plans. I don't think are too rushed, and I'm wanting to castle. So I'm gonna play. I think 92 is more flexible than f3.
Okay.
Although f3 I do have potential of like, maybe fitting for e5.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like f3. Well, if I f3 and I castle, I have to change bishops first.
Why are you saying you'd have to exchange bishops first?
Because I don't like opening this h file with no rook.
I see. I see.
That's after I castle. I'm
So
forced to take with no advantage.
So it's not just that you don't want to double your G pawns, it's that you don't want the open file if there's not a rook on it.
Yeah,
Okay, I got you.
that's the reason. I don't think the g file doubling is too much of a weakness.
Yeah, it usually is not.
I'll put it this way.
Okay.
My first instinct, so I think I'll play now.
Yep. Something else that comes along with playing knight to e2 instead of f3 is you have the possibility of playing f3 e4 instead of just e4. And that allow if you're able to pull it off, that allows you to have a stronger pawn central presence, and you're not the isolated pawn on d4 is not quite as a big of a deal because you have two pawns next to each other. That's not as bad as just having one isolated pawn. Okay, so I'm just going to keep developing. If you can't think of something to do in any position, you want to rely on just good positional play. If there's no tactics going on or something like that, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of, like just rook c1.
Yep, rook c1's reasonable.
I don't think there's too much thought into rook c1. I don't think bishop e7 does too much right now.
Okay. So, because rook c1 has happened, now you have a couple pieces looking down that file. I have to check and see if knight b5 does anything or not, or if bishop takes, queen takes, then knight b5, if that does anything. I'm leaning towards no. I probably can just kick it after I say move my queen to like d7, because there's no my knight is blocking your infiltration to even a possible like knight to c7 or rook to c7. And in the interest of not making like wasteful moves, I probably would not want to play a6 prematurely, or prophylactically rather. I'm considering just playing something like queen d7 anyway to connect my rooks and put a rook on that file. Now, if I played like queen d7 and your knight had gone to f3 instead, then I would have to consider like what happens if your knight comes into e5. Although in general, if you put your knight to an outpost square where you're looking at it with two pieces and I'm looking at it with two pieces, in general I can trade a bunch of pieces and you end up having to double your pawns on that square, which most of the time can be beneficial for black. So I wouldn't be too worried about that.
I do recognize that you can remove an outpost by forcing me to put a pawn on that square.
Yep.
Which I don't necessarily want to do, but that e5 looks nice.
And then, of course, say something like that did happen. You know, you had played knight to f3, you played your knight into e5, I took, and you took. You ended up getting a pawn on e5. So you are doubling your pawns on the e file, but at the same time, you have now opened up another possible outpost on d4, which can be good. And you can see, since the c pawns are gone, if you did do that, then I would not be able to kick a piece if you landed it on d4, because I have no c pawn to kick it with.
Wow.
So that could, yeah, that could be useful. Okay, so I'm just gonna play. I think I'm trying to think. Is it better for me to play Queen d7 or Queen e7? I actually think Queen e7 is probably more accurate because I'm getting out of any possible pins if you play like Bishop to b5 or something. So yeah, so I'm just gonna play Queen e7. Plus, I know as Black, Queen e7 is there are sort of like good squares in general for queens to be on, and e7 is one of them. There are some bits of knowledge like that that are kind of hard to explain, like why that's the case. But if you look at enough theory and stuff, and you watch enough games, you'll realize like, yeah, I don't know how to explain why that's a good square for the queen exactly, but in practice, it seems to be a good square.
So I think now I'm just gonna go for this bishop takes, king takes,
Okay.
castle. Well, I do like my bishop. I don't know if I want to just get rid of it or just play. If I just castle, what happens after takes? If you do, I played knight takes, and my knight kind of sucks. It's restricted by your pawns. Bishop can move back and then play e4. I'm okay with that.
Okay. Something else that I had to consider before I played Queen e7 was that my knight on c6, it was guarded by something, because if it was not, then you could already consider like knight takes d5, right? Sacrifice your knight, and then I take back the pawn of the knight, and then you'd be able to take my knight with your rook, and that would be just a pawn up. So whenever there's sort of X-ray stuff happening, you just want to make sure that you're at least guarded once if you don't want sacrifices to be happening. So the position is still balanced. Like I said, it would probably tend to be in the beginning of the game. It's going to be like that until somebody either makes a pawn break or possibly tries to double rooks. That's kind of how symmetrical positions work. I'm thinking of either putting a rook on the c file, or another idea I kind of like is knight to a5 into c4. And then if you take, then I'll have a majority. I'll have a pawn majority on the queen side, and I will have opened up the diagonal for my bishop on b7. So that's something to consider. Also, playing knight to a5 supports an immediate knight into e4 if I want. But I might want to prepare it with putting a rook on the c file to challenge your rook. Or I could just take your bishop, but I kind of follow the take as a mistake rule in general, unless I see a really good reason. So the one problem with me playing knight a5 immediately is you could consider taking the bishop. I take with my queen, your knight comes to b5, and you would possibly infiltrate on c7 at that point if you wanted to. So in light of that, I'm going to play a rook to the c file first before I consider knight to a5.
something to think. I haven't developed it at all. There's a moved. Let's see. My first idea is bishop takes, queen takes, maybe 5. And I don't know what this should be. Queen could go to a lot of squares. Queen could go like.
You're
She can.
thinking of taking the bishop and playing knight b5?
Not yet. I actually like I'm liking this bishop d5, bishop e5, to then bishop a7 or a4, to then play knight b5.
Bishop b5 to bishop a4?
Yeah, to then play knight a5 with like kind of control that light square file. After bishop takes, queen takes, knight e5, and then your queen has to enter that file or go to d8, because your queen squares are limited to 97, 98, and knight d8. I'm gonna try it.
Okay. So you're saying bishop here, then exchange, and then knight to a5, or bishop to a5, or sorry, a4,
I'm liking bishop a4 first,
and then knight to b5?
and then exchange knight b5.
Okay, I got you. So every time a piece gets into somebody's camp, you always want to consider, is kicking it a good idea or not? So immediately I need to consider, is a6 here good? If you just took the knight, I could take back with either. If I took back with the rook, then you would have knight b5, and I would have to consider if that's a threat or not.
Mm-hmm.
My rook on c6 is guarded by the bishop, but I don't like the infiltrating too much. But again, like, if a piece is advanced and it can be kicked without any tactical things happening, then all that has happened with that piece coming into your camp is they have helped you advance your pawns. And if you got a knight to b5, so long as your knight's not either taking my pawn on a7 or getting to like c7 or d6, then I'm not too worried about it. I am considering again, I'm considering a6, but not a6 immediately. I'm considering the earlier plan I talked about of knight to a5, aiming for c4 in conjunction with a6 at a certain moment. I kind of like the looks of that. And I'm still not worried about any e4 breaks because you're going to isolate your pawn on d4.
Mm-hmm.
So I need to see if I play knight a5 and you take my bishop and you play knight b5, is that an issue? Knight a5, bishop takes, queen takes. Oh, I don't need to worry about that yet because your knight can't come to b5 yet. You have to move your bishop first.
Mm-hmm.
So I think knight a5 is perfectly fine here. I have a thing I tell everybody. You might have it already, but on every single move, look for checks, captures, and hanging pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Just to reduce the possibility of blunders. Blunders are not fun for anybody, even if like you're the winning side. Like nobody really wants to win. Maybe some people like it. I'm not sure. But I like it when the game is clean and somebody wins because of like deeper ideas. but that's just my personal preference.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I am going to play knight a5. Not worried about knight to a4 at all. It's not going anywhere from there. Knight a4, if you did play that, that would restrict me from playing a6 immediately, because I'd have to consider knight takes b6. But then knight a5, knight a4, a6, and you took, then I would win your bishop, and then you'd win the exchange, and I'd probably be okay with that trade.
Mm-hmm. So I was looking at knight a4 if you play a6, totally, or
Yeah.
yeah, that was fine. But now I'm liking my idea. I'm not afraid of. Ooh. If you go b4, what do I need to do? Or if you go c4.
If I go knight to c4.
C4. I can't immediately kick it anyway because I lose the a pawn.
Right. This is a type of position it's good to know. It's good to know that if there are two pawns arranged in that type of way where a knight can attack both of them at the same time, that's a really strong outpost for the knight at that point, because you can't kick it without losing your other pawn.
Mm-hmm.
And if you didn't like my knight in your camp, you would almost have to trade your bishop for it, which means I'm getting the bishop pair. But at the same time, that's not necessarily bad, because you could always trade off one of my bishops, and I would no longer have the bishop pair.
Yeah, so that makes sense. I'm thinking of, if you come in, how do I protect the b pawn? Maybe just like rook c2.
Okay.
I think rook c2 is fine. After my move here would be bishop a4. I would just continue with my plan to get mate knight d5. After rook c2. Yeah, so I think if you come in, I'm playing rook c2. I can't really ever kick it anytime soon, but I could, if I really need to, like, maybe set it up, but I would take a lot of moves.
Mm-hmm. Something else to consider that's a little bit deeper is that if I get my knight to c4 and you guard your pawn by playing rook c2, I trade my bishop and you took with your knight, I could already consider sacrificing my knight for your b2 pawn, in which case if you took that with your rook, now since your other knight has taken on g3, your knight on c3 is no longer guarded, and I could take that knight with my rook and I would be able to pawn in that situation. That's a little bit deeper.
Yeah, that's much deeper, but I still...
You can understand it though, right?
Yeah, I know, I get it. I just can't see that. I would not think that far.
Right.
Like that's the difference, I think.
It's a very slow accumulation of little bits of knowledge, and once you have a whole bunch of them, then you start creating more problems for your opponent than they can sort of deal with, and you're also advancing your pieces at the same time, and it starts creating like a tidal wave kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm actually just liking... I'm gonna allow knight c4, I think. Oh.
And sometimes, like when you're looking at your own language, sometimes it's not I'm going to allow, sometimes it's I can't stop it, and how do I deal with it being that I can't stop it, right?
c4 takes, then this is just a risk. Yeah, I'm gonna just continue because I think
don't know how. Do you know how to add time on this? I know how to add time on chess.com.
Yeah, I know how to. It's the little blue button above, so it's like yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Thank
So
you.
I'm gonna add time if you get too low, because I don't want like flagging to be an issue.
Okay, I think exchange. Take. Okay, I think I'm gonna go for this idea. I'm gonna play bishop takes,
Okay.
queen takes, and then a4.
Okay.
Gives me
Interesting.
b3 to kick, or gives me and protects the pawn. Although if you get in, takes b4. Why can't I play just a4? Or sorry, a4. Can I play a4 now? I don't know. I like this though. Oh, this gets dangerous though, because your queen could come to. You can come to b4.
B4, yep, that's a possibility.
That's a scary square. Holy.
I'm just gonna keep your time around mine, so you're not worrying about it.
I'm gonna continue with this plan, and I'm gonna allow. I can't stop. We'll go to this word. Can't stop. Knight c4. We'll try this.
I like your idea of a4 though, because that is one of the ways, if your pawns are arranged in that way, to make it so knight c4 doesn't necessarily hurt quite as much. But every time you push pawns, then you're leaving some weaknesses behind. You just want to make sure you consider them. So bishop a4 does make it that knight c4 is like completely allowed. So you don't have even the opportunity to try to challenge it. I'm thinking of still knight c4. That's one of the main considerations. Another one I'm considering is a6, b5. That will solidify knight c4 even more and stop your intrusions on possibly b5 as well. And since your bishop is now on a4, if I push a6 now, I don't have to even worry about knight to a4, because you can't put two pieces in the same square. So I'm considering those. I also am considering at some point making like a g6 or an h6 move, just to create lift for my king and no more back rank threats at that point. I could also consider bishop a6, pinning your knight, but then you could always put a piece on b5 at that point. I'm not sure if that's helping me or not. So if I play knight c4 and we eventually trade and you play knight b5, I can just go back to e7 with my queen, and your knight doesn't have any infiltration squares. Although I would have to consider you take my rook, and if I took with my other rook, then a7 would hang at that point. So I'm considering now possibly just a6. Although knight c4 would make it so knight c4 would make knight b5 hurt less, because there's no infiltration at that point. So I think I will probably play knight c4, and you'll have to deal with the threat to your b2 pawn while I can continue other plans. Yeah, this looks good.
I think I said I like rook c2 here.
Just remember the other thing I told you about, which is I could take, and if you took with your other knight, I already have knight.
Yeah, you have a pawn.
I have a pawn possibly. So
yeah.
You could do it anyway and just not take with the knight. You could take with you'd have to take with your h pawn, because if you took with your other pawn, then e3 would fall, right?
Yeah. think that's the way to do it, and I don't think all the players on the queen side are queen side, so if I take, I'm not afraid of the stage file being open.
Right.
Because there are no pieces over there. Right now, so. I can always just go rook e1. I just give up this any open file.
Yep. Rook b1 would be a backward move.
Yeah. That's something that you have to admit mistakes.
Yep, this is true. I was playing a national master who was rated 2280 USCF in an over the board tournament, and I had black, he had white, and at some point in the game he had to make a backward knight move, and he ended up going back and forth on the same square, or the same two squares, like 3 times. And at that point I knew that because he was making backward moves that his position wasn't great, so that gave me a psychological edge, and I did end up winning the game. I think I was like 19, I was like 19-20 at that point.
That's sweet.
Yeah, but you can tell when people start making weird moves like that you have at the very minimum like a psychological advantage. And you can keep pressing that, of course.
I am looking at here. Bishop takes d6. Knight b5. Linus move all day.
Yep.
And just potential rook takes knight.
Really? You're considering an exchange sack?
Just for that, yeah. I don't think it really does much for me. And I'm just trying to figure out where your knight could go. And I'm figuring out maybe if he like in between takes b2. I don't think I care. I think that turns out okay for me anyway.
Okay.
We exchange queens, but I think I like this. I probably shouldn't like it, but I do.
Okay, so I have 2 options. I can take with the queen or take with the knight. Taking with the knight is kind of interesting, with possibilities of sort of like clamping e4 even more. But I don't really see a huge reason to do that. I'm not scared of queen takes, knight b5, because your knight is not going anywhere else at that point. And I'll just go back to e7, and then I'll play a6 and probably b5. So I think queen takes is probably better. And b2 is a consideration, even if you're considering giving it up.
So now, I think I just have to, I'm stuck into knight b5, but I'm gonna look. Knight b5, b2.
I can't play takes b2 immediately if you play knight b5 because my queen's under attack. So you would be gaining a tempo in that situation.
That's why I'm not. I don't think that's. I think that's okay. Where do you go? I'm gonna play it.
So my plan here was just to go back to e7 and then play a6. So I guess something I need to consider is, which may be your plan, which is if I play queen e7, you just play b3. And I take on a3. If I take on a3, you still can't really come into c7. So that looks to me just like a pawn. queen e7, b3, knight takes, a3. Say you took my rook. If you took my rook on c8 and I took with my other rook, again, a7 might fall to your knight. So I may be able to take with the bishop instead. But yeah, no, takes with the bishop probably would help me to actually keep the pawn. Whenever pawns are being given up, you have to check and see if they have sort of like enough activity to merit the pawn sack. But I don't, let's see. I don't see, I could play queen to d8. That's a possibility. But then I wouldn't be hitting a3 twice if you played b3. Another thing I could consider is just playing knight to b2 anyway if you pushed b3, which would be forking your queen and your bishop. But the correct square looks like queen e7, like I already thought about, so I'm going to go ahead and do that.
Okay, so now I'm looking at now I have b2 and I have to worry about.
Yep.
And b2. I really don't mind that. Yeah. I don't mind c2 at all.
Okay. So I could just play a6, b5. That's a possibility. I also have a square on e4 for my other knight if I want to push that in. And if you try to kick it, I have knight takes e3 again, like we already talked about. Your pieces will be a little jumbled up together if I play a6, b5, so I might consider that immediately. And then my knight will be very difficult to ever break from c4 if you wanted to. So I'm going to start with a6.
One square.
Yep. Okay. I could also consider b5, b4 immediately and make your pawn isolated on b2. But for now, we'll just play b5. And then I'm thinking about just playing like an h6 in between here because there's not a lot for you to do on the queen side as far as like kicking pieces or advancing rooks or anything.
Yeah. I think winning 2 pawns for a piece here is no good.
Yeah, and if you did that, you might get yourself into a situation kind of like the Banco, where I get 2 rooks on the A and the B file against your 2 pawns.
Yeah.
And those are weak anyway, even if you had not sacrificed a piece to get to that position. So yeah, I don't think that sacrifice would have been so great. I'm going to make an in-between move here and play a6, or h6, which is a little slow, but I don't mind it. If you ever take on c4, I'll probably take with the d pawn, opening up my light squared bishop, and I would have the queenside majority now that I can push later on.
looking at e4.
Okay.
No, because you just play b3. b4 is
Yep.
b4.
b4, a5. And if you put your pawn on a4 and your pawn gets stuck there, then you can never, like, rotate a piece through that square.
Yeah. And I'll never be able to. Your pawn's just become even more, or even stronger.
Yeah.
It's not all that great, yeah.
And also, if you did play a4 and I played b4, that knight is going to have to go to an awkward square, like b1 or a2.
We're gonna go here.
Okay. So I'm thinking of doubling now. Just doubling rooks. I think that's reasonable. And again, if you ever push b3, I can just take on a3. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and double rooks. And your queen is a little bit awkwardly placed because you would like to double also, but your queen's in the way of your other rook coming across, right?
Yeah.
If you want to add time to my clock too, we can just keep them around like 6 or 7 something minutes, so we can keep it about the position, not about flagging.
I think I'm just gonna trade. This mate has caused so many problems. Probably should have done that way long ago, but let's see. I think we take the deep bomb and then I get nothing really.
Yeah, I would be happy with that trade, and I would probably take with the d pawn, like I already said, to open my light squared bishop. I could probably just take with the rook and double anyway, and that would probably be still good. But likely I would take with the d pawn if you took my knight.
I'm gonna play.
Okay. So now in this position, if I didn't double, you could even consider like b3, and if I took, you might be able to sack your knight on d5. Although that wouldn't work, so I'd take back to my knight. But I was just saying because you're doubling up on c7 now. But you always want to consider all those. So I'm just going to double rooks. That looks good.
I think I'm gonna take. Take here. We'll try this. Just go for this. F3, E4.
Okay.
Oh wait, that's a blunder and a half. No, that's why I played C1.
Yeah, queen c1 covers your e3 pawn.
Yeah.
For the moment. So, although what you did make your e3 pawn a little weak, so already I can consider playing e5 myself, which would make my pawn on d5 a little weak, but I could start stacking up on your e3 pawn, just shift some rooks over. Kind of like that. Do I have anything better? Yeah, I think I might play e5. That would create a possible outpost for your knight on d4 if you took, which I would need to consider. But it's hard for you to guard e3. Yeah, I think I'm going to go ahead and play e5.
Okay. So now I think I'm going. Let me just takes. We'll try this.
All right. So if I take with my d pawn now, you might be able to just play e4 immediately. Fix your pawn structure, blunt my bishop, and your knight is covering d4. So it might be beneficial for me in this case to take with the rook and just keep that grip on the c file. Although I do like... So the question is your knight on d4 going to be enough of a weakness? I think I'll take with the rook. Keep the grip on the c file.
I think I looked. If you take with rook, I play b3.
Okay. All right. So I can't take your knight, so I'm just gonna go back to c7. There's no sacks. c7's guarded enough times. So your c3 knight is now pinned to that file, which I could use at some point.
I'm looking at like queen d2 to play rook f(c1).
Okay. Queen d2 would hang a3, right?
That's not too bad. And if I play like b4, you just like come back to rook c4 potentially.
a4, I would play b4, and you would lose your rook on c2.
Sorry, b4. I play b4.
b4.
b4, you can just come back to
Yep.
c4, rook
Yep.
c4 if you really want it.
Mm-hmm.
If I play like rook or queen b4, that's a really awful square for my queen. And if I just take, that's not my secret, probably.
Something else to consider, though, if you did play queen d2 and I took your pawn, that would hang my pawn on e5. Although I could just take intermezzo, say queen d2 takes e4, knight or pawn takes, and then I could take the pawn on a3.
I think I'm just gonna play. I think I need to move this e knight somewhere just so it's slightly more different. No, I do this. I'm not so sure.
Okay. I think I have to take.
And then
Okay. Interesting. So I'm gonna go for a5. You can't move that knight yet because c2 will fall, so I'm gonna try to play b4 if possible. I think in the previous move, knight to d4 might have been pretty good.
Okay.
Okay. I don't see a lot of benefit with pushing. Probably want to trade. Maybe play knight c, rook to c4 possibly. Pawn takes. Thank you for that. So I could consider either trying to gang up on your e3 pawn, just shifting all the rooks over, but that would get rid of the pin, or playing just like rook c4 to go after that pawn. I was considering pushing the pawn and sacking it for d4, but I don't know if that's necessarily doing much. So I'm gonna go for rook c4.
With rook c4, I think I'm okay with rook d4.
Okay. Rook d4. Okay, so I can take with the pawn. I might consider queen back to e7, ganging up on that other pawn. Queen e7 is kind of interesting here. Rook to e7, possibly. I think I like queen e7. You still can't move your knight. I'm adding one more attacker to b4.
Like the rook takes. And then like knight a2 and the pawn.
Okay.
Maybe knight a2. So rook takes. Now we'll look at rook takes. Rook takes. Knight a2. Rook takes. Rook. And if pawn takes, knight a2 is a lot easier. Try it.
Okay, so I still have the d pawn takes is kind of enticing, but then I hang b5 immediately, so I'm not sure if I like that. Rook takes would keep the tension, and if you took my b pawn at that point, I could take your rook, and you would I would remove the defender for e3, so I could take e3 with check if you did it that way. And if you play knight a2, then to me that's a backward move, so that's a good sign for me. So I think Yeah, I think taking with the rook is correct in this situation.
And I feel forced to play knight a2.
Okay.
Knight a2 is...
Knight a2 also would run into the same thing where I could take your rook and then take on e3, right?
Yeah.
The one good thing you have going on is I have a bad bishop due to my own pawns on light squares.
That's what I looked at with knight a2. I'm like, can you remove a defender? The bishop attacking a2, but not really. Or not anytime soon.
Maybe with like a d4 sack and then get the bishop in. But
Yeah. But I think in that time I can get another defender.
I think the most important consideration regarding knight a2 is the fact that you would lose your e3 pawn with check.
Yeah. I don't know how I save. Anyway. So maybe I just want to lose a pawn and win one of yours. Like, the only thing is like knight takes b5, but it's the same idea.
Yeah.
It's all the same.
Yep, the e3 pawn is weak in all those lines.
I think I just have to let it be weak.
Yeah, and if you get to forcing situations, you just try. If you see you have to lose a pawn, you just want to try to lose the pawn in a way that is the most beneficial or gives you the most drawing chances.
A2 here. I'll lose it.
Okay. Okay, I don't see anything better than takes. I do, I forgot, I have an appointment with somebody at 10 o'clock, so I think we probably should let the times run now and just play as is.
Yep.
Okay. So now I can push d4 with possible d5 or possible d3. You don't have any checks yet.
So what I like with d4 is queen c5. Oh wait, no, yeah, queen c5. Yeah.
Queen c5 is interesting.
And you don't have any checks.
Okay. So I see an intermezzo attack that looks like it might be pretty decent for me. Which is bishop d5. Attack your knight in the corner and possibly get my bishop to the really nice square of c4. So if you take my pawn and we trade, then I just win your knight on a2. And otherwise, I get into c4.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm looking at check.
Mm-hmm.
Check. Knight blocks. No. Check. Knight blocks. Let's see this. Or you just option 2.
Okay. So if I play up, then you have the other check.
Mm-hmm.
In which case I would have to play g6 and lose my knight, but then you'd lose your knight on a2, which I might be okay with because my bishop again is going to get to c4. And my bishop covers f7, so your checks kind of run out at that point. I could also block with the knight or the queen, which might both be okay. But I don't know if I want to go into an endgame. think giving up my knight for your knight on a2 is probably the best plan. Let's see. Here, check, here, takes, queen takes. No, I'm not sure if that's great for me. Maybe knight blocking is the right move. Knight blocking actually looks pretty decent because now you have to worry about your a2 knight and my bishop is going to get to c4. Okay, we'll go for this.
Yeah. This looks not good.
And you could, I guess, consider taking the pawn on d4, because then if I take my queen, you win my knight, right? But then in that case, I just take on a2 anyway.
Yeah. I think I am gonna. Although, do you have something else? Not really. I don't think this is good for me at all, regardless. I think you just take a2 anyway.
Oh, no, actually, there's another line here, which is just bishop c4 check. And you have to go back with your knight, and then I take on e2 with check, and you have to go to g1, and then mate is on f1. So you'd have to give your queen up in this situation.
Yeah, I think this is it.
Yeah.
Or, yeah, because, yep, this is forced here. Very nice. Good game.
Thank you. Good game. You played really well compared to a lot of the students I've had. I think your thought process was very straightforward. I don't have a lot of time to like go over the game, but when I'm done,
no, that's fine.
when I'm done with my next session, I'll go look at the analysis, and we can get back. Maybe if we get back together again, we can go over this one at that point.
Okay.
And we can also look at the other position we talked about.
Cool.
So, yeah. So just think about it if you want to pursue like structured lessons or not. It's completely up to you. I don't do any high pressure or anything. I hate that shit. So yeah, up to you. We'll stay in touch though. Okay, Liam.
Yeah. No. Awesome. Thank you so much. This was a good game.
Yeah. Good game. Good play. Talking it out helps a lot, right? Like during the game.
Yeah. No. I appreciated hearing your thoughts as well.
Yeah. And I have the recording. I will upload it to my channel at some point. I'll give you the link, so you'll have that to access later on.
Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you so much, and good luck with the other stuff today.
Yeah, thank you. Have a good one, Liam.
You as well. Cheers.
Bye.